Hi everybody, welcome to your next session from the series of Unlock the Value of System Center and Azure Pack. A little bit about me. My name is Paul Keely. I'm a System Center MVP. I'm a father of two and I much prefer to be outside than in front of a PC, but being in front of a PC pays the wages. If you want to make contact with me, you can get me at paul.keely@infrontconsulting.com or Paul_Keely on Twitter. So I'm a managing principal consultant for Infront Consulting. We are a boutique specialist system center organization. I'm an MVP for 5 years. And really what I do is I specialize helping companies understand how to piece together a system center and how it would work in a larger environment. Lots of people, I think, have got, operations manager and config manager deployed, and they don't really know what to do with automation and self-service. And they don't really understand or have a join-up strategy for what they're going to do with, CMDB integration, asset management, and all that kind of stuff. And so my job at Infront is to help organizations understand the architecture and plan for, what they're going to do in their environment. So what we're going to cover in this session is we're going to look at, how can we much greater improve a user's understanding of, self-service and automation and how it can really help. And so essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by looking at how do we create, so what I'm going to look at is building a VM in Azure. And, how can we do that in a more automated, kind of useful fashion? So what we're going to look at is, first of all, building the VM in Azure. And then we're going to say, well, okay, there's lots of limitations to that. So what we're going to do is, we're going to look at how does the VM creation work inside Azure. Okay, so you go to the portal, you go to manage.windows Azure, you say new VM, and we're going to have a look through the menus and see what's available and look at its limitations. And then we're going to say, okay, so look, if that's how I could create it through the portal, the most sort of useful thing is how do I do it for PowerShell? Okay, so we're going to take a look at a PowerShell script and a bunch of variables that we're going to feed to it and a bunch of examples and comments in the script, and we're going to get the PowerShell script to run. So that, because ultimately what I want to do is I want to go to Service Manager, I want to say new VM in Azure, and I want Orchestrator to take the inputs that I've fed into the portal. I wanted to take those inputs and bring it into a PowerShell script. I wanted to go to Azure, deploy the VM, and tell me that it worked and life was good. Okay. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at the PowerShell script, to get it done. And once we've got that done, we're going to say, well, okay, how do I get this into Orchestrator and into Service Manager so that it works correctly? And ideally, Service Manager could do with having some lists in place to hold all the fields that we'd like to put in place. So, we're just going to have a look at a real simple, 10-second kind of custom management pack to extend a class inside Service Manager. And when we have that class extended, we're going to create an unsealed management pack in Service Manager that we can build those lists from. And from that, then we're going to look at how do we turn inputs from Service Manager into the PowerShell command. So if you think about it, a user is going to go to Service Manager and they're going to input maybe 10 fields. And so how did we get those 10 fields into variables in the script, get the script to take our Azure published settings, connect to our Azure subscription, and boom, create us a VM. And then we're going to look at, how we can view the success of the VM create inside Azure. So here's a pretty simple way that we're going to look at to give you an overview of what's going to happen. What we want to do is we want to look at deploying a virtual machine into Azure. We want it to be automated. We want to have an ITSM flow, so we want it to go through Service Manager. We want the provisioning to have multi-list capability. So when I used to provision to Azure, I used to hard code everything into my PowerShell script except VM name. And so you just get to pick the VM name and that's it. But in this environment, we're going to give you lots of drop-down lists. We're going to do some custom authoring to allow you to put in drop-down lists. You're going to be able to work with them from there. So what we're going to do is we're going to first of all look at what happens in Azure. So what happens in Azure when you deploy a VM, it's just, a workgroup VM has a dynamic IP address. How is it managed? If someone just goes to a portal, they just click a VM and you say new, next, and they get a VM. How do we charge it? How do we control it? How do we understand its management? And so if that all goes through Azure and through Service Manager, it's a whole different ballgame. So, we're going to do the deployment with Orchestrator, but it's going to be through PowerShell. Obviously, you need to just get your PowerShell publisher setting files. So we're just going to download those files, put them into a share, and we're going to call that from our file. We need to look at how we're going to deploy the VM. So we're just going to take a deploy VM script inside PowerShell. We're going to just run it and just see, does it work? Because if it works inside PowerShell, then we know Orchestrator just has to feed it parameters and it will go and work fine. And then what are the parameter files? So essentially the key thing that we need to work out is how do we get things from a portal in Service Manager, like VM name, VNet name, storage account, IP address, etc. How do we get drop-down lists for them, feed them into PowerShell? And how do we error check? So my error checking, is super basic. It's just saying, hey guys, if we expect a VNet name and you didn't put one in, then we need one. And that's the only error check I'm going to do in this. So from an orchestrator standpoint, we're going to look at how do we go and interpret fields that are compiled inside the portal that's been brought into Orchestrator. We're going to look at how do we get those from Orchestrator into PowerShell. How do we feed those parameters? We're just going to do that through a management pack mapping. And how do we see the output? So how do you go to Orchestrator and say, okay, look, I've asked for this, I've gone to do this, what's the output? What are we going to see? And then from a Service Manager perspective, I want to see, how do we extend Service Manager to have custom Azure lists? So like I was saying at the start, when you go to deploy a VM, there's lots of questions that one can be asked to deploy a VM. And so one of the key things that we want to be able to do is to have custom lists so that you can go somewhere, you can just do a drop-down box, and you can say, I want to deploy into this VNet. I want, this storage account, etc. So how do we get those custom lists in? How do we build a service request inside Service Manager? What's it kind of going to look like? And how do we get, how does the input get sent to Orchestrator from Service Manager? So what we're first just going to look at is, you've just got your standard Windows Azure page here, manage.windowsazure.com, and I'm just connected to our subscription. and I have a virtual machine in here, in from DC1, which is a domain controller. And ultimately what I want to do is I want to get a VM to, use the right storage account, to use the right virtual networks, to use the right cloud service to go and join this domain controller and be on the domain. Okay, so what would happen if I just go to the portal? So if I just say, new VM, and I just say quick create, okay, and I say DNS name, and I say MVP demo PK123, okay, and first thing it says is, look, I've just done a check, and on Cloud App, that's an individual name, so I'm going to be allowed that. We're stuck with the Cloud App option here, okay. I'm just going to leave it at Server 2012, but so you can see here, because this is kind of important, is you get a whole bunch, a whole list of options, yeah, and it's the same with the size. You get a whole list of what you can do with the options. So wouldn't it be really nice if we were able to present options like this to a user? And, I get to put in the username. Username is not allowed. Okay. PK1 and a password. And from there, I get a second drop-down list to say, where do you want your VM to be created? And so, once again, it's another drop-down list. So with that in place, I can just hit create VM, and you can see instantly it will start to provision, right? Now, this is, there's some pretty important stuff to understand and explain here, because the provisioning starts instantaneously. And when I do this from PowerShell, the provisioning is going to start immediately. Okay, PowerShell will give an output, and it will say, yeah, look, I went and I've started the provisioning, and basically once the provisioning has started, PowerShell pulls away, because it's sent all the commands, and it's up to Azure to go and create that and get it working. Okay, so that's it working now, but what are we going to get from that? What we're going to get pretty simply is we're going to get a VM called, MVP demo PK123, but the VM is going to have a dynamically assigned IP address. It's going to be on the Cloud App service. We can't pick the virtual network. We didn't get it goes into default storage account. There was just a whole ton of things that were automatically decided for us. And after that, to access that, I'm gonna have to, remember the username and password, because don't forget it's not on the domain. Gonna have to remember the username and password, and I'm gonna have to go and download the file. So what I want to show you, what I'd love you to imagine is, imagine a much nicer option, which is a user just goes to the standard portal that they manage all the requests from in work. Yeah. So you're just going to your standard Service Manager portal, and inside the Service Manager portal, you're just going to say, can I have a new VM? You're going to fill some stuff out. We're going to provision the VM. We're going to put it on the right networks. We're going to join it to Active Directory. We are going to, and then we're going to email you an RDP link to say, hey, look, here is the VM that we've created. Here's access to it. Just log on with your Windows account. And then the beauty of this is that absolutely everything is going to be recorded in Service Manager, and it's going to, work in a CMDB. So just super quick, how do I go and run commands from my desktop into Azure? Well, I just need to go and get my my Azure publishing file. And as soon as I do, it just says to download the file, and just grab the one you want. So I'm just going into the Azure sub that I want the file for. It just allows me, do you want to download it? And I say save. And once my publisher settings have come down, I'm signed into Azure, then I can just go and save my publisher settings. And so what I've done is I've just saved them here into a location. And then lots of people will be pretty familiar with the deploy new Azure VM. So you can see just here, we're going to say, deploy a new VM, and we're using a variable for the VM name, instance size, and we're using a variable for the instance size, instance image name. We're just using all those. We want to provision the VM. We want it to join infront.demo. The domain is infront. We're giving it a username. We're giving it an Azure subnet name from variable. We're giving it a static IP address, and all of these variables we want to feed into the create VM. And once we have those variables in place, we should be able to just go and fire out a new virtual machine. Now, at the top of this file, what I just do is I just give a working example for somebody looking at this PowerShell to say, this is what's actually going to work. Meaning, if you did if I just clear out the hashtags, the rem files, and I just hit F5, that's going to provision a new VM infront demo del 103 on the virtual network of infront demo, instance size small, service name infront demo, storage account, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so the very first thing that I just want to do is just get rid of the clear out comments, and then if I just hit F5, it's gonna say so it comes in here and it says, okay, here is the current location of the Azure publishing files. I always get this warning, new VNet name, DNS settings, deployment lab or deployment name, blah 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 blah. So I get this, and then within 60 seconds it will go and start to deploy the VM into Azure. So I'm just going to pull that slightly to the side. So you can just see the warning here, and once it says that, it says infront dem 13 has been successfully provisioned in Azure. Now that just means that PowerShell has fired it across, and basically life is good. If I just hit refresh on that and refresh Azure, we should see that new VM being provisioned in. And you can just see, infront demo 13, oh, there's my current status, go away, current status. So you can just see infront demo del 13 is, just going to be provisioned in. And so I'm pretty happy that that part of the script is going to work. So let's just have a look at what's going to happen here. So the very first thing I'm doing is I'm just, declaring what my parameters are for this, the VNet name, the instance, etc., all the stuff that you saw down below. And then you can just see here, it's, here's the example that I'm giving. But then if we just go and we look at what I'm saying. So I'm just saying VNet name, okay? So I'm just going to go in and say, if the VNet name, if you haven't, I'm not checking what your VNet name is. I'm just saying if I'm expecting a parameter for VNet name. So if you don't provide a parameter, then in Orchestrator, under the Pure Data tab, I'm going to say the name of the Azure virtual machine must be provided, i.e., I actually should have said e.g. demo 001, and then I'm going to exit. And I've done the same in the script for all of the components. So I'm going to say instance size. Azure virtual machine size must be provided, small, medium, and large. So and the reason for this is because I want to be provided with something in Orchestrator if this fails. Because if I don't, and it fails and I have a problem, it's kind of difficult for me to understand what the problem is. So you can see here that this is the output that the PowerShell script has given. I get this warning, and then I get infrontdel03 has been successfully provisioned in Azure. Now, what is that actually going to look like? What that is actually going to look like is, if I just go to my runbook, which is deploy VM in Azure, and I just take the runtimes that every time that I've done in test, and I just go on to that, and it says, the initialized data was successful. It got the service request, which is this here, which I'm going to look at, and then it deployed a VM in Azure. So if I go down to pure output, and on pure output, and then if I go to deploy VM in Azure, and I go to pure output, you can see that it's going and taking my publisher files. And then look what it's saying. DNS settings or deployment name can only be specified in the deployments, which we saw a second ago. And then in front, CD demo 001 has been successfully provisioned in Azure. So what did we get here? Warning, VNet DNS name can only be specified on new deployments. IF demo del 03 has been successfully provisioned in Azure. So you can see that the outputs from here are going to be brought into Orchestrator, and we can see what's happening there. If I could just explain one point, is notification failed, and what's happened is I've just put in a step which I haven't got right, that when I provision the VM for you, that you get an email notification, but I'm doing something wrong with that. It's failing. So the VM is being created successfully and everything is working well, but the notification, I'm just going to have to work on. So what do we have in place here? So to try and explain what's happening in this runbook, we have a self-service portal, and the self-service portal, a user is going to make a service request and enter lots of things into the service request. So we need to try and connect a relationship between the initialized data, how are we going to start the runbook deployment, from the service request. And what we're going to do is we're going to go find the service request, we're going to find the data in the service request, and we're going to use all this for the initialized data here for the service request to take those values that have been filled in, put them into the variables of the create VM, and then it should just go and create a new VM for us inside Azure. So let's just go for a second, have a look at the portal. So just to try and explain what's going to happen, you're going to go to your corporate portal. So and when I log on to my portal, so I've been building this just for the demo, so it's a real simple portal, but the whole point is that you'd be able to put in lots of detail, lots of service requests, not just creating VMs from Azure. It would be, all the information that you'd like to put in. And you can see if I just go to general deploy VM in Azure, and I just hit deploy VM in Azure. And so VM name, I'm just gonna say MVP 2015 MAR March PK. Okay, so there is my VM name. And then the thing that would be nice is to be presented with drop downs for things like instance size. So you can see that we just have, our instance. And then I get, offered things like service name. So what service do I want to join? What VNet do I want to join? What Azure subnet name? What's the storage account? And then, for me, I'd like to put in, a static IP. So I'm going to say, here's an IP that's in use. And then I need to go and fill out the rest of the details. Now, what are the options that I need to put in here? Well, this was the point of me doing the, information on the PowerShell script, because I get told, for example, that the service name has to be in front demo, and then VNet name is in front demo, and then Azure subnet name. Azure subnet name needs to be subnet. I want it to go into subnet 1. Storage account is in front demo. I've given it the Azure static IP address, and then it just says Azure image name. So if I just pick, Windows Server Data Center October 2014, just as an example. So here's the crux of the challenge that we're trying to do, or that I'm trying to explain to you, is first of all, we've just put in lots of user input here, okay? And all of that user input needs to be translated into each of these parameters, so that when we scroll right down to the bottom, the deploy new VM in Azure gets the inputs from this form, puts it into the variables, attaches it into those variables, and we get a new VM in Azure, and it's joined the domain and all of those, pretty cool things. So now you understand that this is the user input into the service request. So if we just go back here and we go to, get service request and get relationship and get return data. So here is, return data from the service request. So for example, if I just go into this one here and I say get service request, and I go in and have a look at what's there, if we go to things like Azure image name, it's going to show the image name that the user put in. And if we say static IP, there's the static IP that was chosen. Storage account, in front demo, up one, Azure subnet name, and you can see it's subnet 1. Okay, so what I'm doing with this runbook is I'm making a connection, because ultimately I need this to start with an initialized data. And the initialized data that it's running with is the runbook activity input ID. Okay, and what I need to do is I need to get this data here to be placed into the get service request input, put that input into the command and go run it. And so as you'd expect, when you see the get service request here, and we go in and have a look at it, and we say get service request input, what's it going to say? It's going to say, Azure image name, and give the image name. It's going to say Azure subnet. It's going to say instance size, and you're going to see small. So this is how we are connecting the inputs that the user gives into what the user's created. So let's just go and fire that off. And what we'll hope now is that that service request has been deployed. It's going to go out and it's going to go and go from new, and it's going to start to do things inside Azure to give us a new VM. And you can just see then that when we just give it a second, it will have gone from new to in progress. And once it actually starts to kick off, then it's going to send those details over to Service Manager, or over to, well, it's going to go through Service Manager, going to go through a bunch of workflows, and then it's going to leave that, go to Orchestrator, and start to do its thing. When we go back to Orchestrator, because this is running right now, we can see that it has started. It's done the initialized data, and what it's doing is it's getting the service request input. So it's taking the fields that I've asked it to go and work with right now, and it's going to take them, and then hopefully it's going to fire them over to deploy VM in Azure, and that's going to be our next step. And then, as you'd expect, we can just see the VM starting to be provisioned into Azure, and it's MVP 2015 March PK. So what does that look like, or what is that going to start to look like from the Orchestrator standpoint? So if we just go into the runbook details, and we just have a look at the get SR input. So you can see it's data center December 2014 edition. The static IP is of course the IP that we picked, and then if we just go down to VM name, we have a look, it's MVP 2015 March PK. So essentially what's happened is that we're after creating a connection between how the user inputs data into Service Manager, how that data gets pulled across over into the script, and how the service request for inputs from the user get put into the parameters of the script to go and build a virtual machine for us. So what should start to happen now is that this machine should provision, and it should be on the right subnet that we want. It should be using the storage account and on the service that we want, and it should have joined the domain, which will be kind of the key thing for us. So you can see right now that we've declared a bunch of parameters, VM name, VNet name, etc., that we know are going to be fed into the script. We know that if we do something wrong, that we're going to get an output here from the script. And then what's the next thing that we're doing to try and understand, what's working and how things are happening? So, first of all, I want to go and I want to make sure, because I'm not exactly sure where this is going to run on, meaning if I had 5 or 6 servers that are all going to be, runbook servers for Orchestrator, I need to make sure and know that the DLLs, for Service Manager get called and get brought in correctly. And then one of the key things that I'm going to identify is what's the working directory of where you can get the Azure file subscription. So I've copied that to all my runbook servers, and you can just see it's there. And then I'm just gonna come in and check that the subscription file is in the working directory that we expect, right? And then obviously if it's not in place, I'm just trying to constantly just write it so that it makes sense to people if there's a problem. And you can see you must download the Azure subscription file, and make sure. One of the last things that I want to make sure is that I need to set the DNS server of the domain controller that's sitting in Azure. So I'm just saying, DNS01, new Azure DNS name, DNS1, and I'm listing the IP address of our domain controller. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to make sure that the VM joins the domain and, is basically, working. Now, if we just pop over to Service Manager for a moment, and I just go to Library, and inside Library I go to Lists, and inside Lists I just say SER, Service Manager, and so you can see that there are a bunch of lists here, and the lists are, unfortunately right now they're static objects, but it was the easiest way for me to do it. But I've listed a bunch of static objects that are going to be provided in the drop-down list. So for example, I need an Azure image name, and you can see here that I've just gone and added the common Azure images that I want people to put in on the form. And this part of it, I have to say, is a little bit basic, but it was a kind of quick and dirty way to get things going. If I just say add item, and I just say the item that I want it to be 10.0.0.45, for example, and I just say okay. And so basically what I'm able to do is I'm able to add different names, different subnets, different services that a user can put in. And so, if I just go to virtual networks, you can see I've just listed different virtual networks that we use in Infront for Azure across different subscriptions and different areas. And so how was I able to do that and come up with that and get that in place? So I had to do a little bit of authoring for I just basically needed to extend the class in Service Manager so that I could have classes where I'm going to create a sealed management pack. And inside that sealed management pack, I basically was creating pretty much empty classes that were just going to be the placeholders for lists that I was going to manage and create those lists. And you can just see, for example, here, when I go into this management pack, for example, under VNet name, it's possible just to go in and see, the different classes that I've put in, VM name, VNet name. And so basically we're just extending the classes with the Service Manager authoring tool. And with the classes extended, we're then able to go into Service Manager and create, custom lists, and we're able to go in and manage, the custom lists of, VM sizes and what we'd want to do. Okay, so you're looking at this right now and you're thinking, okay, there should be two questions you'd have. First of all is, how does it work? For example, like how am I there adding lists into this management pack? Well, obviously what I've done is I've just brought in the sealed management pack, SER. So there is the in-front deploy Azure VM request, and it's a sealed management pack. And you can just see what we've done is I've just, custom class that's required for the deployment of VMs in Azure self-service portal. Okay, so I've just created a sealed management pack, and then I've just created an unsealed management pack, service manager portal offerings. And basically what I'm doing in this management pack, because it's unsealed, is I'm putting in the, custom objects that I want to create. So things like my lists, the different objects and items that I want to appear in the service offering. So then, what does it look like and what form does it take? So if I go to my library and I go to the service catalog and I go to service offerings and I go to my publish service offerings. So I just have my deploy VM in Azure service offering. And then from here we get a good bit of information to understand what's happening. Okay, so I'm going to place everything inside this single unsealed management pack. So it's deploy VM in Azure. It's inside the service manager portal offering management pack that you saw a moment ago. Just related services, doesn't have any. And then here is my request offering. So the request offering that I have in place, okay, so you can just see it's deploy new VM, it's that template, and then the user prompts, and you can just say, VM name is the text that has to be presented from the user, but then instance size, we're saying MP enumeration list. And so basically what I've done for everything bar VM name is I'm going to ask it to take the data from the management pack. So we created the sealed management pack, we created the lists, and the data for user prompts is going to be taken from the service request, from the list drop downs that are enumerated in the management pack. Okay, so then just in terms of configure prompts, again we're just going into, so the first one is the string because you have to put in the VM name. Everything else is just a drop down. So you're going to go in and say, hey look, find the data from the drop down lists. The reason why it pretty much has to be drop down lists is because it would be near impossible for a user to, well, first of all, they wouldn't know what those data fields were, and it has to just be drop down lists, so it's easy for them to understand it. And then you can see, we're just taking the runbook activity and we're bringing it across. Last of all, if I just go to VM and I just download the RDP connection to it, I hit connect and I say use another account in front administrator. Just hit yep. And when I drag that VM over, it was domain joined, and I got onto it, with my domain account, not with, domain local account. So if I just go to my local server, we'll go to local server, and and it just says work group. You see, it isn't work group, it's infront.local. So that's the machine joined to the domain in Azure, and it all worked awesome. And so to finish up, you can get me Paul.Keely at infroconsulting.com, on Twitter Paul_Keely. I'd just like to point out hashtag UK MVP Cloud for Twitter. You can find out more about the MVP community from there, and of course you can get a free trial for Azure by going there. I've one last request, which is there are a number of technical data center workshops, transform the data center workshops coming up. I'm delivering one in Reading in June. It would be fantastic for you to sign up, come along, come to meet me, and see if you could bring a few people to it, that we can spread the word about how amazing the hybrid cloud is. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and good luck with the rest of your day.